Morning, everyone. Thank you again for coming. And I just have 2 slides after the introduction, and I want to spend a lot of time demoing the product and why our cloud portfolio is really special. I think we have a special story that we want to tell you, as well as your audience as well. So to start off, again, my name is Michael Yang. I'm a Director of Product Management at SolarWinds Cloud. So I'm responsible for all of the SolarWinds Cloud products, which includes Pingdom, AppOptics, Papertrail, and Loggly. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is, as Joe mentioned earlier, all of our cloud product, we have over 1 million accounts. 1 million accounts or customers that's using our product today, which is pretty significant. We also do like over 50 million log searches each day across our log solutions. And lastly, we do like 2 million metric processing per second across our products as well. So we have a pretty powerful set of products that a lot of our customers use, as well as we're doing pretty special things in terms of technology stack.
Good afternoon, or good morning, I guess. My name is Keith Kuchler. I run SolarWinds Cloud Engineering for the products Michael listed before.
So I just have this slide and one more slide, then we'll go into the product demo. And one thing that I want to highlight from our product perspective is what I see within the monitoring space, right? So when you fundamentally look at like how DevOps or IT pros monitor application or infrastructure is, there are really 3 different ways we see it. One is metrics, right? Everyone loves metrics, right? It could be metrics regarding application response time or server uptime. You could even create a metrics that's like business metric, like how many users are logged into my website. Or it could be a technical metrics like, hey, I'm using RabbitMQ, what's the queue size and queue processing time, right? So these are different metrics. And typically you want to provide these metrics in a time series database, in a real-time graph, using different gauges possible to kind of display that data in a very most flexible way, right? So you have a different set of product that does this, right? So that's one way to kind of do monitoring and instrumenting data is metric. Second thing is trace, and trace is really interesting. As you know, like when you have very complex application or infrastructure system, sometimes it's very difficult to look at the root cause, right? You look at logs, you look at different metrics. Sometimes you need to like traverse through user requests all the way to different application component. It could be different microservices running on a different ephemeral infrastructure if you're running on the cloud, all the way to the database or even like external services, right? So in order to really troubleshoot that is you need to look at how this request is flowing through all those different dependencies all the way to databases or external services, right? And the best way to kind of troubleshoot that is looking at what's called traces, looking at like how those requests came through all different components, right? And again, you have different product that does this. And the second way is really this is important. And lastly, logs. Everyone loves logs, right? When I look at the logs, it's really you have different on-prem solutions like we do in SolarWinds. We have a cloud-based SaaS solutions like which we'll demo to you. And to me, logs is you can look at the logs in 2 different ways. One is I want to just look at like all these logs that's coming in from different places and do it in a live tail fashion, right? Looking at all these different discrete logs, right? That's one way to kind of do a troubleshooting. Another thing is you want to get these logs and somehow smartly kind of parse this data and automatically provide some sort of visualization or dashboard you can start from and basically be able to drill into those logs as well, which is what I would call a aggregated logs or aggregated events to look at those logs, right? So again, coming back to it, there are like 3 distinctive capabilities in which IT pros and DevOps use: metrics, trace, and logs to do your monitoring and to do really your day-to-day job, right?
So, I'm sorry, Michael.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess we're jumping right into monitoring, and one of the things that a lot of people run into, especially when they're dealing with cloud and cloud services, is knowing even what's out there. So monitoring is great if you know what you have, but how do you take advantage of monitoring if you don't already know what you have? How do you guys help with that part of the journey?
So I think one of the ways that Michael will probably talk a little bit about when we get to our APM solution, AppOptics, is the use of distributed tracing actually helps you find out what systems are communicating with one another. Recently, we had a situation where we were using AppOptics for a customer's environment where they have architectural principles that say all of the web applications cannot directly connect to the database and make queries. They have to use APIs. It turns out in using AppOptics, using distributed tracing, they actually found connections between applications and the backend database, which they didn't actually know was happening. So not only was it a violation of the principle, but it was also an elevation of privileges to be able to do that on the database. So using distributed traces, it actually helps you demonstrate what applications are talking to what other systems in your environment. So that's definitely one way that you can start seeing that communication pattern. You can see what data is going between the two systems, what types of responses are coming back, where your errors and events are coming in. So it definitely helps with, I'd call them like discovery type of activities.
So with that, you know, there's been a lot of, there's just been a lot of escapes of data with people having poor controls around data. I think Ed can relate to this a little bit.
Yes. It's like
is there an ability? Is one of the metrics, and hopefully we'll get into this. You know, value, so that we can identify. Well, oh, I didn't know this system. Maybe it's legit business use case, but oh, there's a S3 bucket. There's being exported from a on-premises database into an S3 bucket. That maybe there's a legit reason to do that. But then I can see, oh, this is quite a bit of data. Let me see what's going on with this S3 bucket.
Okay. Yeah, we can show you a little bit about the types of information we can show you. Movement of data between like internal systems and external systems, depending upon the mechanism, could be tracked. But in some cases, you know, if it's a file movement, then the cloud products today are not targeted at that in particular. We're focused more on end user experience of the applications. How is my user being impacted by a performance particular challenge, whether it's in the application or in the database or in or CPU related. But most of our diagnostics and observability are really focused on either internal or externally visible monitoring or actually internally visible monitoring, right? On premise looking out or externally looking in.
And this is where I think doing a time series database to look at these some of the metrics, what I would call out-of-the-box metrics. And there, for example, in our APM solution, there is out-of-the-box metrics that we provide. And we also have a capability to do custom metrics, right? Whether that is custom metrics in around the business visibility or on the line like technical metrics you want to measure, you can do that as well.
So you guys spoke about digital transformation, and now we're speaking about pretty much business as usual. Metrics, traces, logs, that's been around since, I mean, before I even started with the computing. When you start thinking about digital transformation, I'm really looking at how does this help me transform my environment? Knowing what I have helps me transform what I need to go to.
Sure.
If I can dream it, I need to get there.
Yep.
But I don't even, when you start talking about this, I don't even see a dream.
Sure.
I see business as usual, moving to the cloud, using cloud-based tools, and that's all great.
Yeah.
But to me, that's not digital transformation.
Right.
I'm looking for what's the dream? Where do you want to go with this? How is this going to help me? When you say time series databases, that's great. I'm looking for second order machine learning. Time series is passé for me. I'm way past that. I need less false positives.
Sure.
I need a way to move what I want to do. I mean, that use case of, hey, where's this treasure trove of data going to? That's actually important to me as a business person.
Sure.
Is that will govern, I have to govern my data.
Yep.
It has almost nothing to do with what's happening on my network. It has everything to do with what's happening to my data.
Yep.
When I start thinking digital transformation, I start thinking data, who has access to it, where it's going, what's the business case for even that happening? And, you know, unfortunately, while metrics, logs, and stuff are great for business as usual IT, when I start talking digital transformation with people, that's the last thing they're even thinking about. But so how am I going to use this to get to where I want to go?
If I could give you a couple of examples, actually. That's a great question. So one way to look at it, as Joe mentioned before, let's take like SolarWinds, for example, right? SolarWinds.com, as Joe mentioned, we have a CMO that is directly responsible for the SolarWinds.com, as well as he manages the web dev team that has direct correlation. Like when you have a slow SolarWinds.com, that has a direct impact to the businesses, right? So one of the examples on the traces is the fact that with the Pingdom, we provide, I'll demo this a little later on, we have a way to kind of correlate. It's not just your traditional user session or traces, but we want you to look at your website load time and performance along with some of the digital transformations, like what is it related to the user sessions associated with that? What is it related to the bounce rate associated with that? See the business metrics as well as the technical metric, combining that together. To me, that's very uniquely differentiating, and it will help with someone like CMOs or the web dev team that's going through that journey, right? Aligning the business objective with the digital.
So you're saying digital transformation is aligning the business objective with the technical objective?
That's one of the factors that we do, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you don't...
I'm actually not picturing digital transformation that way, but I mean, it's an interesting interpretation.
One other example I want to highlight associated with that is part of the business transformation is the fact that you need to, right now, everything's software is dominating the world, right? You need to, underlying software and application is running the businesses, right? And as part of that is you need to quickly be able to release applications and release capabilities that aligns with business transformation that it supports, right? And part of that is fundamentally in the technology, what's happening is, you see the way you build application is fundamentally changing, right? You used to maybe outsource some of these application development into a large team that built a large monolithic application, which took a long time to release. Maybe every 6 months you would have a release on it, right? That paradigm is changing. In order to support the business objective, you need to be able to quickly release application, and fundamentally what's happening in the industry is the way you build application software is changing, right? You're moving from what's called monolithic application to microservices applications, which will allow you to quickly release applications with different components really fast, right? And once you have those complex applications and software and with different dependencies, like how do you actually go and monitor that and have those capabilities to support those fast releasing capabilities to support business objective? And again, there's ways in which I think we're approaching it. It's very unique in the market and support that.
I mean, this is the danger of having me in the room, by the way. I'm just going to take the mic. I think it's a really good question. And it's one that, like, to a degree, a lot of the analyst community is trying to answer right now, too, right, in reality. So if you look at, I don't know, if I were to look at, like, a Gartner paper, for example, they redefined what APM now means, right? So it was a whole bunch of different things before, and now they're bringing it down to 3 things, which is around, what they call DEM, with digital experience monitoring. They have something called ADTD, which is application discovery, trace, and diagnostics. That's kind of a mouthful. And then they have application analytics. And I think that's, that third piece is sort of what you're hitting at is how do we then use the analytics capability for us to be able to, look at, doing more machine learning and that type of things to tell you things that you didn't know before. And so those are the 3 different ways that it's getting broken out right now. So even in that side, a lot of these specifics now mean something different than they were before. And so before, if I looked at from a metrics perspective to a trace, if I have a single stack application, it's easy for me to do that because that environment is not leaving, let's say, a Microsoft environment or something like that. They're kind of, working together. As soon as you have multitudes of services and the world becomes flatter but much wider, that relationship ends up breaking, that link ends up breaking, going from a Microsoft technology to a Java to a Go to a Node to something else. And so when we see trace now, it's not about a single stack trace anymore, it's a distributed trace. And before, the way that you would correlate the information is really more around time, right? You can say, X happened at the same time about when Y happened, even though there isn't an actual hard linkage between those 2 things. And you just assume that Y happened because of X. In a lot of cases, that actually is not true because that problem ends up coming back. That's why things like distributed tracing is very, very, very important. It's not about a guesswork anymore. You're not guessing. It's a hard link. Imagine if I were able to take a session ID and I put it to a transaction ID. I know exactly where in that kind of flow of information in this distributed system, it has failed for that end user, okay? So on a very low level, kind of away from metrics, traces, and logs, that is kind of redefined, and that relationship is a little bit different because of the distributed nature of that application or those sets of services. On the higher level, because there is this whole digital experience monitoring, which is part of APM, but I think what Gartner is trying to do is to now take that out and say, you know what, this might be its own market, even though they haven't given it any numbers or anything like that. And what they're looking at in terms of transferring there isn't about just in-user experience monitoring anymore. It's not just about performance and availability, but it's now also about, like, are they having fun on the application? Which then you're going to need some kind of analytics to be able to pull social information and things like that. Are they dropping off of my website before they achieve a goal? Right? Because that's kind of how, from a business perspective, that you think about it. I put this onto a website because I want someone to download something or someone to purchase something. And so some of the capabilities that's, I think, are you going to demo at all? So some of the capabilities will hit that portion of it as well, which is more not on the low-level type of function, but a high-level function. It is, did you get to your goal? What are your customers actually doing? Are they falling off of a web page? Because that means that I'm not making money. They're not getting down to the download page or the purchase page, right?
Yeah, I think it will be great to get a good balance of, SolarWinds is, by definition, a technology company. You guys can go deep into performance monitoring and tracing and getting up to, I think, what Ed was talking about and what I would like to see is how do you translate? And a lot of times, it's great that you guys have been TFD participants for 5 years, so you can see the community moving to a point where we have to, as technologists, start to add value higher up the stack so that we can justify getting a SolarWinds product to not just our VP of infrastructure or now to the CMO. And maybe funding now doesn't come from the VP of infrastructure, but from the CMO's budget, because now I can take this data, feed it into a higher level tool, and basically as an engineer get what I want, which is a SolarWinds APM solution. So I'd love to see how you guys make that connection of where's the technical value to the business value.
Sure.
Correct. And again, a lot of we're kind of going through kind of this journey as well, right? So, today, like, for example, after this session, Chris is going to come up here and talk about backup, right? What's interesting about a backup?
Quite a bit,
Backed up a server, right? But when you put business context to it, it's super important,
well,
right?
Actually, even more than that. It's like, how do I hook metrics, traces, and logs, which I'm collecting all this wonderful data, to ensure I'm backing up the right thing? So if I have a trace out there that says these 16 machines are all talking to each other, and these 17,000 machines are also talking to those 16, well, first off, I need a context around that to say, hey, is that actually legit?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a security policy and a business policy.
Sure.
Yeah.
And who sets those? Then I have a data protection policy that says, okay, I have leakage of data, some things going to S3, well, I need to know that. Then it's like, okay, what do I back up? Well, I need to know that. But also I need to know ordering so I can recover properly. So when I think digital transformation, I'm actually talking about merging all these together to make that overarching digital automation, orchestrated, whatever you want to call it, transformation of my business to save me time in those recovery situations, which are incredibly high stress, incredibly, it's not just high stress. You got everybody and their uncle breathing down your neck. And it needs to be as relaxed as possible with a push button, hey, just recover this. You got the basics, but I'm looking how you hook it all together. I don't see that. In any of
Not yet.
Yeah.
Which we're about to show.
Please do.
Yeah, I think we'll show you a little bit of some of the key points that you're looking for, which is really deriving the value from lots of data that has been there for a very long time, right? As Joe mentioned, it was kind of okay, I look at time slicing, I look across the systems, and I try to do pattern matching myself. Now with distributed transactions, we're following that trace across systems, between languages, between different apps, between different OSs, between on-prem and something running in Azure or AWS. And so now we're starting to piece together, okay, I actually understand what this business service actually means to me. It's not just a set of applications that are running a website, right? It's more around what does my infrastructure look like? How is data being passed? And then how exactly are end users being impacted across the globe? Are people in a certain geography having a negative experience because of bandwidth limitations?
Well, I have even one more question further than that. It's not about user experience It is for a lot of people.
It would be for a CMO who wants to understand bounce
Actually,
rates.
for CMO, it could also be GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Which is
we
going
all
to impact
enjoy.
everybody.
Yeah.
So how do you tie all this into that would be a really interesting discussion.
We can probably start showing some of the outside looking in and then down into the details of the data to show how we're actually doing some of the correlation between transactions and understanding what's happening on each individual application server.
Yeah, and the other thing is we actually have a whole section, not here unfortunately, and I want to get through some of the sessions as well, around GDPR.
Yes.
There's a whole site and knowledge and things like that are dedicated to that. That's already up and running. And so if there's some interest in that, we can go ahead and, at some point kind of walk you through that as well.
Okay, good. All right, so just one more slide, then we'll go into a demo. So we covered this already, but what I want to kind of highlight here is that there's a different vendors in this market, right? So there's a vendors that only focus on metrics. There are vendors that only focus on log. There are vendors that only focus on traces. And you see some of the vendors, when you look at like APM solution, whether on SaaS or on-premise, you see the convergence of the metrics and traces together, right? Providing some of those key, for example, application performance metrics like response time or throughput, and adding that with the traces to get a full visibility across APM and infrastructure monitoring. You have different vendors that does logs, but those vendors wants to go added value, providing the metrics on top of those logs that you're generating, right? So there is just wanted to highlight the fact that there is a different vendors in this space, and one thing that I wanted to highlight is the fact that again,
what's the DEM and market segment?
The digital experience monitoring, which used to be also called end user experience monitoring.
Okay.
So that's the term that I think Joe mentioned in terms of how the industry is moving. It's not just end user experience monitoring anymore, but I'll give you an example. Like we have a Pingdom customer that uses a lot of SaaS services, for example, Salesforce marketing solutions. And what they do is they're using the Salesforce API for integrations into their own applications. So for them, it's not just what the end users are experiencing using that endpoint from Salesforce. It's also about how that API is performing with the integration they built. So it's a combination of both human interaction as well as the machine-to-machine interaction, API to API interaction, as well as some of the other component that I mentioned before, which is what does the experience monitoring mean to some of the business stakeholders like CMO? So that's the digital experience monitoring component. Did that help? Okay, good. Any questions before we dive into demo? Okay, good. Just want to the one, obviously, again, just to highlight, we have a solution across the AppOptics, Pingdom, Loggly, and Papertrail to cover all these metrics, traces, and logs areas, right? Across different SaaS providers that's in the world. And I think we're very uniquely positioned to provide this complete set of solutions. Okay, with this, let me go into the demo. So what I want to do is actually, I want to give you our own example, which is Pingdom. So Pingdom is our digital experience monitoring. So, we have Pingdom's around for a long time. It's been traditionally known for our uptime. So we have different probe servers located different places in the world and checks for whether or not your website is up and running. It also provides what's called digital experience monitoring or visitor insight that shows you like performance insight, right? So one thing is we have our chief marketing officer is very interested in Pingdom.com. He wants to make sure the website is up and running properly, as well as the users that's coming out to Pingdom.com has the right performance associated with this, right? Because if the site's slow, we're gonna get a lot of people coming onto our site and just bounce off, and that impacts our business, right? So the Pingdom is a website. What I want to do is I want to show you this Pingdom as a website. And let's say we have different users coming in. and we have different users that's coming into the website, and how do we like monitor in terms of performance associated with Pingdom.com? So the Pingdom, with our digital experience monitoring with Visitor Insight, seeks to answer 3 high-level questions. One is, I, as web dev team, manages multiple websites. So one, do I have an issue on any of the websites that I'm monitoring, right? From end user perspective, right? And you see here, we have Pingdom.com, PingdomTools.com, MyPingdom. We also have AppOptics.com. So as a web dev team, they're monitoring this website. And the one thing that I want to highlight is, unlike some of the other end user experience monitoring solutions that's out there, I mean, it shows you the load time, page views, AppOptics score. But the couple of things I want to highlight that is very useful for the business stakeholder is, how does the website performance associated with, for example, bounce rate? If I have a high load time, then I'm going to get a lot of people just coming in and bounce off of it. Also, does that have any correlation with active sessions? How many users are actually right now having an active session on Pingdom.com? So what we try to do is correlate the end user perspective of the Pingdom with some of the business metrics like active sessions and the bounce rates associated with that. So looking at it really quickly, it can say, okay, I may have an issue with Pingdom.com as an example. Then what I want to do is Pingdom try to answer like the second questions associated with it, like who within my user community is having this issue? Because Pingdom is a worldwide brand, so I may have a user that's coming in from Austin, Sweden, Germany, India. There may be all different places that's coming in, right? So who within my users having those issues, and I want to be able to slice and dice and say, okay, give me that breakdown of the site performance from either desktop, phone, or tablet, or it could be based on browsers, or it could be based on different countries.
So, Michael, can we go back to the original dashboard? So from a user experience, from a network engineer / systems administrator, this board kind of makes sense to me. Or look at it, pretty intuitive. I know exactly what most of this means. And this is the business metrics conversation.
Sure.
One of the metrics I'd like to see, I don't know if this is customizable from this point, but what is red? Like, if load time goes up to 12 seconds, is that good? Is that bad? Where's the threshold? And then what I love is that you guys go in and then we can break it down by geography. That may be different per geography.
Sure.
So how do I answer those business questions?
Sure. So there's a couple ways we can do that today. So this AppOptics is, we actually have an AppOptics that you can go and configure, and you can like define what the AppOptics is. Like anything performing under 1 second is good, or 2 seconds, and you calculate that based on number of users. And actually you can go here, you can edit, and I said, well, you know what, for me, green is like anything that's less than 12 seconds. Well, maybe that is not the case. Maybe I want to make it less than 4 seconds. And I want to make it for less than 4 seconds of Pingdom. That's OK. For AppOptics.com, maybe that's, I need to make it even like less than 2 seconds. So that you have a way to kind of customize this. And notice that, you know, I had a lot of green lights here, but if I make it to like 4 seconds, you will see that it turned a lot into yellow, right? So you can kind of customize.
Is that universal for all the dashboard? Is that context for the user, for each individual user?
This is in context of this particular website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Being able to set the different time frames, is there a workflow that allows for an actionable item if it does go to yellow from green?
Yeah.
Does it automatically ping someone back to say, hey, you need to check this? Because if I'm not always looking at my dashboard,
Yeah.
does an engineer get notified
Absolutely.
of that?
So actually, there's two different ways we can do this. One is we have a way to kind of share this report. So a lot of times when I talk to our DevOps engineers, yeah, this dashboard is great, but I have a CMO that doesn't want to log into Pingdom. So we have a way to kind of share some of these performance information. online through URL link. You don't even need a Pingdom account to do that. That's one. Second thing is you can set the alerts. So based on a certain performance, that threshold you set, or let's say I'm checking the pingdom.com, and if I don't get responses from our probe servers within like 100 milliseconds, that means I'm down. So I need a alert. So we have a lot of customers that actually created alerts and email system that goes out, and we all can also integrate with Slack, VictorOps, different like collaboration tools that's out there. We can also integrate that with as well to give you that type of notification.
You can also insert times like maintenance windows so that if you're doing a deployment, that it's not going to alert you during those times as well. So,
can you integrate? We're kind of missing the exciting stuff though, because to know if page load time goes up is boring. That's easy to do. That doesn't matter. What's really interesting is if I see that page load time goes up and bounce rate goes up.
Yes.
That's what matters, and
exactly.
that's what the value is here, not that I can say page load time went from 4 seconds to 6 seconds.
Exactly. So how do I, like a lot of times, the thing that I heard from a lot of my customers was, yeah, you know what, I have a separate tool that does like user bounce rate and campaign. I also have a technical tool that does like page load time, but it was always difficult to kind of merge that together.
Exactly.
And this is what we hope to do. Like quickly, I mean, we're not intending to be like Google Analytics, but there are certain metrics like bounce rates and user sessions that has a direct correlation with performance. Like if the website's slow and if you're not responding within certain seconds, people are gonna just bounce off, right? So our vision is to take some of these business metrics that's relevant and correlate with the performance metric, make it easy to share, and create alerts. And this is obviously first step in a journey. And we looked at a lot of other products that's in the market as well. And I think we're very uniquely positioned to kind of provide this combination of business metric with performance information.
And sometimes the page load speed is interesting to a lot of people. For example, we have a situation and a capability in here called Film Strip, which allows you to see the load time of the page. After a fresh new deployment of a site, you may see that the images used are not compressed properly, or they're at too high of a resolution, which causes the load time of this brand new site that you launched to just completely drop off, and then in turn your bounce rate goes up and your user flow goes down. And so it can be used in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of personas that certain areas of this product target more than others. And as Michael said, one of the reasons why we allow sharing of reports and things is so that people who don't care about some of the data, they actually care more about geographic distribution, or what types of systems are coming in what area. That data can be shared with people who don't actually want to log into a console and see an active system running, but just get an update.
You said it appeals to some personas more than others. Who are those personas that it appeals most to?
You know, it depends, because originally, as we started with Pingdom, we went particularly after uptime and distribution. And then recently, we've gotten a ton of feedback internally and by customers that people who are dealing with marketing are much more interested in the performance of sites, because they can see, hey, you know what, this isn't an elastically scalable system. Engineering, you're building these applications, you're moving from monolithic applications to microservices, and then certain services are not elastic enough to be able to handle the fluctuation in bandwidth, or we don't have the ability to do real-time deployments to be able to handle loads during certain windows. And so they're now more interested in, what's the experience of my users? Is your content causing my bounce rate? Is your load time impacting how my site is performing? And so we're starting to see a lot more, I guess, evolution of the customer base, who's not as much interested in things that they take for granted today that somewhat have been commoditized, like, hey, I assume your service is running, but is your infrastructure negatively impacting my marketing plan, for example?
So in that respect, then you could use this tool for setting that benchmark, right? So you could capture the statistics of the site as it is, produce that for the marketing guys, who then go and make changes to the site, and then rerun and look and see what the differences are in the metrics. I'm even thinking about putting up test sites and then using a load simulation tool to tell the marketing department, yeah, it's okay that you want to go out and do this product promotion, but if you're expecting an extra load of so many thousand eyeballs on the site during this time window, if we can simulate that on a dummy test site and monitor through this, and then see whether or not we've actually spec'd it up and scoped it to be able to handle that kind of a load. And it just gives them, I think, a little bit more data to realise what the experience is going to be like for the user if they're going to go out and do a big promotion. And do we have the capability to support that so it is a good user experience?
Absolutely.
It is, and it's providing the data, for example, as more companies start saying, okay, I'm running this, but I need IT to run this, or I'm buying a service from Azure or AWS, I need the data to prove that I can justify additional spend or that the spend makes sense. Or we should be looking at alternate technologies or potentially a technical transformation of the code that's being used behind the scenes or the app server. A lot of what you're going to see here is us producing data for people to use to justify business reasons to make a decision to do something different or to evolve in a different direction to make your business more scalable so you can actually make more money.
And that's the whole difference that we've been talking about in terms of the change from IT being the people that are keeping the lights on to being the people that are enabling the business to make better decisions.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great.
So is there the ability to like integrate with external data sources so that you can say, we know that when our response time on the website goes up to this much, we're typically losing this much business because people stop browsing or stuff like that, so that you can justify performance cost versus the cost of upgrading. So we've got a database that says, for this long, we're losing these many orders.
Well, same thing we do with up-down loss. Like, you know, if SAP's down for 3 hours, we've lost $2 million. Right. If SAP is slow, we've lost money. Some organizations are advanced enough to quantify that, and most aren't. So I think a couple of questions is how far down. You guys can make a bunch of different technical decisions of where to go with this product.
Sure.
How do you, my question in addition to John's, is how do you prioritize which direction to go? Because you can absolutely add value in the way he just said, which is, oh, we can help you guys based on correlation with accounting systems and back in SAP, show you how much data, how much revenue you're losing when it slows down versus some other direction. Like, where's the ask from customers?
So I think our vision is to continue to, I really feel this is a first step in a meta iteration. Our vision is to kind of continue to correlate some of this business metric with the performance. And you're right, I mean, this is what I would call like different custom metrics. Like, how do I like correlate different metrics around upgrades or costs with the performance and all that? And those are some of the things, the way I look at it is two different ways to do it. There is an out-of-the-box way to do it. There is a different way for you to kind of be able to configure and customize a way to do that. So for us, one is continue to kind of provide a unique capability that kind of combines the business metric with some of the performance metrics together. Show like out-of-the-box views like this, but also at the same time kind of expand and provide a different ways for different people to kind of slice and dice the data. So that definitely is the vision in terms of where we are taking Pingdom, is to continue to kind of expand those personas associated with that, whether that's out-of-the-box capabilities, as well as some of those configuration and custom way to do that.
Michael, can you do that with reports now? Can you do custom reports where you could take the technology insights from bounce rate and then make a report back for the business insight for marketing to say, oh, what's our top content or the top pages that are being hit?
Sure. Actually, we actually have that out of the box, which I wanted to show you, which is a good segue into this, which is, again, the Pingdom tries to answer three things I mentioned. Do I have an issue on my website? Who's having this issue? And the third is the root cause of the issue from the end user perspective. So if I go into our performance view, okay, sure, it took like 6.24 seconds within the last 24 hours on average to load overall Pingdom.com, but really our backend is, this is actually changing on a real time, is 1.01 seconds. It's really the client processing part, right? Anything that's outside our control is taking 5.4.3, and we can all aggregate this data as well as an example. So what this shows is, from the DevOps perspective, if the CMO comes in and say, our website is really slow. then I can look at this and say, you know what, actually, we're doing everything we can from our infrastructure and application end, and really a lot of the times is maybe due to someone logging in from somewhere in South America, they're on a bus and they're on 3G network. Obviously, that's going to take a long time to kind of load that web page on a mobile devices and 3G devices, 3G network. So it kind of shows that information. And also, this is where I think we can also break this down information into like further, like what is the overall front end component, whether or not it's rendering, DOM component, whether or not it's related to the network in between the client as well as the back end, as well as what's the breakdown of the back end from send and receive. So this kind of provides you like end-to-end perspective from end user perspective, like the overall website performance, and basically if I have an issue and realize, well, it's not really all client processing side, I do really have an issue on my application infrastructure that I'm managing, this is where I would jump off to products like AppOptics. But before I do, just to answer your question, I really like this capability within within Pingdom. So this shows these are all the top pages. And actually, I can even expand this further. So these are all the like top pages that's being viewed by the customers, users, all the end users. These are the average load time associated with that. So obviously, we have a lot of users that coming to Pingdom.com that has high average load. But I also have a total load time. What this is that I combine the page view with the average load time, combine that number to come up with the total load time associated with that. So what this means is that if I have a performance issue on Pingdom.com from end user perspective, I want to focus on websites. I want to focus on the pages that has the most impact associated with that. So just to answer your question, like we have different ways to kind of correlate this different data as well.
So Michael, we're running out of time, so
we are running severely behind time. I've only shown you one out of the 4 products. So let me go into AppOptics. So the Pingdom shows you, like from the client perspective, let's say you do have an issue with your own infrastructure and application. So AppOptics, it shows you the APM and infrastructure component. And the one thing that I want to show you is this APM component. So as we mentioned earlier, like when we're building Pingdom.com, it's a modern application on SaaS, so which means is that it has like different what's called microservices, different services component that's interacting with one another. And this shows you listing of different services that makes up Pingdom.com. And one of the first place I think where the customers hit is our product Public Banner, which is one of the web services that's front-ending the Pingdom.com. This is what I call a version 1.0 of the APM and infrastructure solution, which really focuses on what's the average response time, what's the people that's coming onto site, how long does it usually take to respond back from server and application back to your client, right? So it shows you like average response time, which is in this case 210 milliseconds within the last 60 minutes. Second thing is throughput, like how many people are actually hitting our application and infrastructure, right? The throughput associated that's coming into our site, which is represented by requests per second. Third is errors, right? Anytime you have a website and an application, there are bound to be some errors that's generating. So these are the 3 key metrics associated with that. And we have different time series metrics to kind of slice and dice this data. 95th percentile, 99th percentile. It gives you different HP status codes and methods. This is what I would call like your traditional APM solution. And there are a lot of vendors that's out there that made a super solution and made a lot of money, just providing a different metrics associated with that. Just to go back to there's some questions, why is this different? But to me, it really goes back to the second part, which is now fundamentally the applications are getting more complex, meaning you have different services, different applications, and microservices that make up the overall Pingdom.com. So let's say if this service is really slow, which is one of the web front-end services, it could be due to like some external APIs we're using, or it could be due to some queries that I'm making into database, right? So how do I get the visibility into this? And again, a lot of times, like, it's very difficult to get this visibility unless you start doing what's called tracing, right? How does this look like from the front-end client request all the way to the database or external APIs? And this is what I wanted to show you, which is these are actual, what I'm showing you is these are actual traces, like the user request that came into this web services, and we capture that data. And it shows you the distributions associated with that. And you could see that some of these traces or some of the requests came in really high, right? So let's drill into this, right? So once you click into one of the user requests that's come in, you see this what's called span diagram. So this service, which makes up one of the services of Pingdom, is actually made up of multiple downstream services. Meaning, in order to display this prod banner services, I have downstream integration or relationship with other APIs and services like prod API 2, aggregator API. So this service may not be the root cause of your performance. It could be your downstream services, right? And this is what's called.
How does the system know what the downstream services are?
I'm sorry?
How does the system know what those downstream services are? Right? There's a web server, there's an app server, there's a database server, there's a DNS server, but how do you know what the relationship between them is?
This is where the great thing about traces is that once we instrument this component within where your applications are residing, we can trace that through.
Okay, could you use some actual nouns instead of pronouns? Like,
so every API call, so for example, if the resolving a banner calls 4 different systems in sequence, we follow that communication between all the endpoints. We measure the response
The question
time.
wasn't what you did, the question was how you did it.
We are using the open tracing standard for AppOptics, and we are, depending upon each language that the application servers are running on, have instrumentation agents that we implement, and we actually marry the transactions between all of the endpoints.
Okay, so you're adding instrumentation agents.
Exactly.
We have instrumentation agents for each language, and then we follow that across all the systems, and as Michael can show you, in our very short amount of time, we can adjust the span window so that you can see what happened. Was it a HTTP error? Was it an application error? Was it a credential issue?
So, question maybe for Joe when he gets back, if he's coming back, is big picture. Really interesting, this is built on microservices. First question is the microservices that this is built on, are these multi-tenant microservices, or are they dedicated to this platform?
The services running AppOptics, or the ones we're monitoring?
Yes, running AppOptics.
The ones running AppOptics are multi-tenant.
So a view that says, oh, AppOptics is the biggest consumer of these microservices versus a different application would be a great view if you have it in this 1.0 product. If not, roadmap, that's fine. Just a question is, can I see what tenants are consuming a microservice? What apps are the biggest talkers for a microservice?
Yeah, so you can do that today. You can take the services that you instrument, you put the instrumentation on, and you can group those services to say it's business service A or B, and then you can start seeing all the transaction history of that. So you can also do things like, if your application is using an identity service, the odds are that whether it's monolithic or microservice-based, the identity service is probably getting hit the hardest if your applications are doing authorization and authentication.
Yeah, if I'm using the same AD backend.
Yes, you're going to.
Is it my corporate logins that's slamming my AD servers, or is it a customer-facing app?
You can see that, and you can create custom dashboards to actually pull out those custom metrics and just show you that for, because depending upon the persona, the information that's of interest will really depend, right? We can see things like CPU and memory and disk I/O and all the basics, but
stuff that Howard cares about.
So which goes back. Kong's giving me like all these signs to wrap it up. So I just want to. So just to go back. This shows you like different downstream impacts. So actually it shows you 66% of the time for this request to complete was dependent on this downstream services, not the current services that we ran. So it shows you like different breakdown of these services and where the impacts are, so you can start to drill into this. It actually shows you within the code level, like where these like external service calls are being made. So this is what's called back traces. Going really fast here because of code. And it also shows you different queries. So one other thing I want to highlight is it actually has the infrastructure components. So if you want to look at the CPU utilization, memory, it gives you like different metrics associated with different ways to kind of slice and dice this data. And one other component, which is the actual like time series component, like custom metrics. Like if we're running MySQL as one of the database component, it actually shows you different database components as well. Right.